When the famous king Akhenaton realized that he can no longer live in Thebes after calling for his new religion to worship one god, he had to choose a new place, which is here, Amarna in Elminia Governorate. He chose it to come in here with his followers to worship his new god, God Aton. These are the ruins of the northern palace of El Amarna. It may belong to his daughter Merit Aton, or it could belong to Queen Nefertiti. It is composed of a very big reception hall, a swimming pool, a stable for horses, and many chambers as well. And it is very well preserved, as you can see yourself. The history of religion in ancient Egypt before the time of King Akhenaton, and that's prior to the 14th century BC, was based on the numerosity of deities. Gods and goddesses were worshipped side by side across the whole country, each in his or her favorite city, with the main dominant god over them all, which was the sun god Amon. Then came Akhenaton with his new creed, calling for the unification of deities and concentrating the whole cult into one god only. That was God Aton. The word Aton wasn't new for the ancient Egyptian, for it actually meant the sun disk. It was mentioned in the story of Sinuhe, which is remarkable in the Egyptian ancient literature. Sinuhe said in his talk about the king of his time, he rose up to his horizon and became united with the sun disk Aton. Going back to older periods, the word Aton was referred to in the segment 334 of the Coffin's texts to mean the sun disk, and thus is concerned the first reference in the old texts to the existence of a sun disk between two horns. The sun disk here was connected to goddess Bat, who preceded the existence of Hathor. Atonism itself existed before the time of Akhenaton, for there is a palette from the time of King Amasis I that reads, "He ruled when Aton surrounded the world. The king can see as Ra when he rises like Aton, and like Kheperi in his eyes, and his rays are like the faces of Aton in the western skies." It's noticeable that Aton in this text did not have the ideogram of a god, and thus may be a proof that until that time he was not identified as a god. Atonism thrived in the time of King Amun-Hotep III, father of Akhenaton, for he was relieved on a stone block, worshipping Aton, who was pictured in the form of a human, topped by a sun disk, which is a symbol of God Aton. The new call for the cult of god Aton was met by a great opposition by the priests of god Amun-Ra. Their mighty power that brought them an enormous wealth was not to be compromised, and they felt their status strongly threatened. Collision between King Akhenaton and the high priests was inevitable, and between him and some conservative families as well. So the king had no choice but to declare war against Amon and his priests, and declared Aton the formal god not only of Egypt but of the whole Egyptian empire. He had also ordered the conversion of all of Amun-Ra temples to make place for the cult of the new god, and to erase the name of Amon off the walls and the other gods as well. The change did not stop there, for we find him changing his own name from Amun-Hotep, which means God Amon is happy, to Akhenaton, which means the useful one or the faithful to Aton. As a result, a division happened in the country, especially in the lives of the country's high officials. So Akhenaton kept those who supported him in his new call and dismissed those who didn't admit the existence of his new god Aton. After King Akhenaton tried hardly to establish his new cult in Thebes, he found that Thebes had no more the potentials of spreading his new religion, for the air was polluted with enemies and conspiracies and poison. He had to look for a new location to move to and make a base from which he could invocate his new god. The new location which he chose was in Middle Egypt, in El-Minya Governorate. It's the area over which 3 villages were built on its ruins. They are Tel el-Amarna and El-Hajj Qandil and El-Hawata, which is in Asyut Governorate. The whole area was named by him Akhet Aton, or the horizon of Aton. It's a plain land with pure soil, enabled to be cultivated, with a backdrop of mountains and miles away from the Nile, which divided it into 2 equal parts, both on the east side and the west side. King Akhenaton marked the boundaries of Akhenaton with 14 stelae, 11 in the eastern mountain of Amarna and 3 in the western mountain. All of them had the same important inscription of his oath, that is never to leave this city until he dies. A frenzy of constructional work started in the new city by building temples and palaces and houses and royal cemeteries and tombs for the high officials and workshops for the artists. Among the most important and interesting constructions are the royal palaces. That is because we can hardly find ancient ruins of the houses of the ancient Egyptians in general, for they considered their daily life house a decaying place that's gone just like the human body. So they built them of a decaying material, which is mud bricks. Unlike the attention and care which they gave to their everlasting houses, which are the tombs, for they are the ones that would last forever. Thus, to find the ruins of not just an ordinary house, but of the royal palaces and of a controversial king like Akhenaton is really an incredible finding. There are two palaces found. One is the northern palace and the other is the southern one. The northern palace lies north of the city of Akhenaton, on an area of 18,000 square meters. It's composed of a great open court and a collection of buildings around it. These buildings are the servants' quarters and the harem residence and the altar. There is a luxurious section for leisure time and relaxing and entertainment. That is a swimming pool surrounded by a big number of columns bases. The floor of the palace used to be covered by colored tiles with drawings of natural elements like palm trees and Nile water and fish. The enemies of Egypt are painted too, so that the king and his family and the entourage and officials can step over the enemies going and coming all the time. Part of that floor is in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. King Akhenaton had planned himself the design of his new capital Akhetatun, together with his wife Nefertiti. He had celebrated that event in a great celebration and recorded that on the border stele, which marked the borders of his sacred city, of which only 14 were left. In the northern section of the city, Akhenaton built himself a palace a little bit south of the great temple of Aton and close to the Nile. The buildings are in ruins, but we can still see the design of the palace clearly. The most significant and astonishing construction in the palace is the Hall of the Columns which reminds us of the 134 columns of Karnak colonnade. The size of the hall of the columns in the northern palace of King Akhenaton is 130 meters breadth by 72 meters length, which makes the halls of the royal palaces shrink beside it, especially when we compare it to the total area of the palace, which is 427 meters long and 153 meters wide. This hall comprised 542 columns. That's 408 columns more than the hypostyle hall of Karnak. This hall, in its glorious view, represented a forest full of giant stone trees and palms. The palace itself was built with mud bricks, which decays faster than any material, if not by rain, then by time and exposure. Yet the drawings decorating these walls were rich and very refined and vivid in colors. The capitals of the columns were made of the painted shiny glass that reflected the sun rays and added cheerful and majestic touch to the whole. No wonder it's quite normal to imagine that Akhenaton's palace was the paradise of God on earth, where he sat in peace, away from the troubles of Thebes and the conspiracies of its priests. King Akhenaton saved neither resources nor efforts to turn the whole city into a mini paradise with trees and lakes and flowers and beautiful architecture, and his palace was a mini representation of the whole city, with a wall surrounding it and several gates around it. There were trees leading to the gate of the palace, with a main colonnade and several other halls, and a section for the women of the house, and another for the bathroom. Guests had rooms too, and servants had a special building with its own gate opening to outside. Storage rooms existed close to the kitchen, where wine and beer and food was stored. There was a stable for horses and a barn for the cattle, and a massive garden occupying almost a quarter of the whole area. The City of the Horizon was built to embody the utopia of which Akhenaton dreamed and built step by step, and carried his name for eternity.